Welcome to the Inside Elections podcast, where we analyze elections in a nonpartisan, data-driven, and accessible way. In this episode, we'll talk about the fight for the Senate, including recent ratings changes in two key races. We'll release our latest House battleground survey in a sleeper race in Arizona's 2nd District. And we'll talk about the battle for the House majority with our friend Erin Covey of the Cook Political Report. Buckle up. I'm Nathan Gonzales, editor and publisher of Inside Elections, the go-to place for nonpartisan election analysis for the last 40 years. I spent the weekend doing some weed whacking in the District of Columbia and driving my daughter to Sweet 16 parties in Maryland's 4th District, which is represented by Democrat Glenn Ivey.
And I am Jacob Rubashkin, deputy editor of Inside Elections, and I spent this weekend mostly in D.C. for Yom Kippur services on Saturday, but also spent some time with my family out in Maryland's 8th Congressional District, currently represented by Democrat Jamie Raskin.
Well, a little bit later on, we'll be joined by our friend and Inside Elections alum, Erin, but we have a couple of headlines to go over, so let's do that. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the fight for the House a bit later with Erin, but control of the Senate is on the line as well. We recently changed our rating in two key races, Arizona and Nevada. Here is an ad from Democrat Ruben Gallego and Republican Kari Lake in the Arizona race.
Ruben Gallego knows what it means to protect our country and our flag. He's a Marine. Ruben knows that Arizona families deserve to feel safe. He delivered critical funding for our law enforcement community, and he knows that to secure our border, we need more agents and better technology. That's why the Arizona Police Association supports Ruben. He'll work with anyone in Congress to deliver for Arizona and keep our families safe and secure.
I'm Ruben Gallego, and I approve this message.
4 years of inflation have crushed our families. Where's the money going? Ruben Gallego knows. He voted for massive spending, which created record inflation and made our families' essentials unaffordable. Then, instead of fixing his mess, Ruben Gallego spent our tax dollars to fund illegal migrants at our border. Welfare for them, more debt for us. Radically wrong Ruben Gallego. A mistake we can't afford again.
I'm Kari Lake, and I approve this message.
And here are ads from Democrat Jackie Rosen and Republican Sam Brown in Nevada.
People say, oh, you get to work in labor and delivery. That's the happy place. And I said, absolutely, until it isn't. I have been at the bedside of women who face the most difficult decisions. But Sam Brown thinks those decisions should be up to him. He pushed to overturn Roe v. Wade, and for years he's pushed to ban abortion without exceptions for rape, incest, or a woman's health. Sam Brown would take away their rights.
I'm Jackie Rosen, and I approve this message.
Career politicians are ruining Nevada, driving up prices, causing an invasion at the border, inviting deadly drugs and violent crime into our communities. Kamala Harris and Jackie Rosen have failed America.
Jackie Rosen, she does a terrible job. Running against Wacky Jackie is an American hero named Sam Brown. Sam Brown will vote to secure our border, stop inflation, and cut taxes like you have never heard.
I'm Sam Brown, and I approve this message.
Both races are still competitive, but we moved them from tilt Democratic to lean Democratic, which puts them in a less vulnerable position for Democrats. Jacob, what's significant about those changes, particularly when you look at the overall fight for the Senate?
The big picture for the Senate is still bad for Democrats. If anything, it's gotten worse since the beginning of the cycle. They are going to lose West Virginia. They're underdogs in Montana. Ohio hangs by a thread. But other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? Two seats that they already have in Nevada and Arizona, which for all intents and purposes, we're counting as a Democratic-held seat, despite Kyrsten Sinema and her millions of dollars in travel expenses. And both of those seats look better for Democrats at this point. So what this means is that the prospect of a Republican majority remains as high as ever, but the prospect of a large Republican majority is perhaps decreasing as some of these reach seats begin to move in Democrats' favor. Jackie Rosen has done a very good job in Nevada of defying the partisan gravity in that state. This is a very close presidential contest. For much of the summer, it looked like Biden was going to lose Nevada by a wide margin, especially by Nevada standards. But even as Harris took over at the top of the ticket, the state still looked very close. Jackie Rosen has maintained a really robust polling lead. And in Arizona, we're going to talk a little later about candidate quality. This is another instance of candidate quality really playing a major role here. It's a very tight presidential state. Trump may win it at the top of the ticket, but Kari Lake is deeply unpopular. She's running a resource-strapped campaign, and Democrat Ruben Gallego has done an excellent job of introducing himself to the state, highlighting the most important pieces of his biography, and developing a clear and convincing lead in the polling at the state level, at the congressional district level, that just makes this race a different kind of contest than a Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin.
Right. And so just to distinguish those, the Arizona and Nevada, where the incumbents, where the Democrats are up by mid to maybe more single digits, those races in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, the Democrats are probably up in the low single digits and are much closer races than Ohio is in our toss-up category. And our most likely range is a Republican gain of 2 to 4 Senate seats, plus 2 would be enough for the majority, and it would not matter who wins the White House. So it continues to be good news for Republicans.
It's striking the degree to which they have not been able to gain a foothold in either of these states, even as the presidential race continues to narrow. But again, I just think that it speaks to the specific candidates there. Neither of these candidates are self-funders, which is the case in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Ohio and Montana. And they just haven't been able to keep pace with their Democratic counterparts or their colleagues in other states.
We also just completed our 6th House Battleground survey in partnership with Noble Predictive Insights. Unlike the other races, this race is on the outskirts of the House battlefield and hasn't been getting a lot of attention. So we decided to check it out ourselves and see what was happening. The race for Arizona's 2nd district is between Republican Congressman Eli Crane and Democrat Jonathan Nez. Before we get into the numbers, let's listen to a couple of TV ads.
Open borders, drugs pouring into our communities, handouts for illegal aliens. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have put us all in danger. Endorsed by Trump, Eli Crane is fighting back. A Navy SEAL and conservative warrior, Eli Crane is taking on the swamp and fighting to finish the wall. That's why President Trump is endorsing Eli Crane.
I'm Eli Crane, and I approve this message because we must stop the invasion at our southern border.
Whether you're in Pinal County, in Tuba City where I was born, or here in Prescott, water is a worry. I'm Jonathan Nez. As president of the Navajo Nation, I work with the Trump administration to deliver greater water access for northern Arizona, including rural communities beyond tribal lands. Now, I'm running for Congress because rural Arizona deserves more. I approve this message for rural Arizona because it's time to secure our water and lower prices.
Jacob, what did the polls show?
So Arizona's 2nd congressional district is this vast rural seat that is tucked in the northeastern corner of the state, but actually extends down south pretty widely. It's a diverse district. It contains 12 Native American reservations, but also some suburbs of Phoenix, kind of in the southeast of Phoenix. It has a significant Native American population, which will play into this race. And so we decided to check it out. We worked with Noble Predictive Insights, our polling partner, on the last 6 surveys that we've done of House battleground districts. We polled 414 likely voters, and here's what we found. In the congressional race, Eli Crane, the Republican, and Jonathan Nez, the Democrat, are tied. at 42% apiece, with another 15% undecided. In the presidential race, former President Trump leads Vice President Harris by 9 points, 52% to 43%. And in the Senate race, which you'll recall, we just moved from tilt Democratic to lean Democratic. Democratic Congressman Ruben Gallego is actually ahead of Republican Kari Lake by 5 points, 48 to 43%. So all in all, a mixed bag for both parties here. One race, big Republican lead, one race, Democratic lead, one race tied. We also polled the statewide ballot measure in Arizona that would codify the legality of abortion up to fetal viability. It's been a big topic in the state over the last year, and we found that measure easily passing. Voters supported it 58% to 25%.
Well, it's interesting. Well, I think that this is going to make some news because you have a race that we have rated as likely Republican in a race that hasn't been getting much attention, where a Republican congressman is tied. So I think this is going to make some news, Jacob. But also, it shows that the district is a Republican-leaning district, except under certain circumstances, right? Except for we're seeing the continued trend of access to abortion being popular across different various states and districts, no matter if it's in Arizona 2nd or Kansas or Ohio, or no matter where it is. But Trump winning the district handily shows that it has Republican leaning. It has Republican leanings, and so, but yet Crane is underperforming, and it looks like there's still work to be done on the Republican side. And is he able to recoup all of those Trump voters or those Republican voters against a candidate who is different than the typical Democrat, right? Being a former leader in the Navajo Nation, like, what is that? Is that going to make him stronger? And that's, I think, a very active question based on these results.
Yeah, Nez is the former president of the Navajo Nation, which is geographically a big part of this district. Native Americans make up about 20% of the district's population. They're a smaller portion of the electorate. And then within the Native American population in the seat, most of those residents are Navajo. I want to say it's about 2/3 of the native population is Navajo. And so he begins with some deep, deep ties to a community that is crucial to the Democratic coalition, but does not have a nearly as high a turnout rate as other elements of the Democratic coalition. So upside for Nez, but the presidential result shows that this is still a district that wants to vote for a Republican. But I think the interesting thing is that Crane himself is not particularly well known or popular. He's a first-term incumbent. He defeated a longer-serving Democrat, Tom O'Halloran, last cycle after the district was redrawn to be more Republican. His name ID, he's at 32% favorable, 28% unfavorable. So that's only 60% name ID overall. Nez, the Democrat, is at 29% favorable, 11% unfavorable. So 40%. So really unknown. The quandary in this race is that on paper, there's a lot left to happen. There's a lot left to develop. But in reality, it's not clear how much of that will actually happen, because neither party is paying much attention to this district. Nobody's spending money here. And if anything, Nez is actually outspending Crane. He's got 2 ads up on the Phoenix media market at the moment, running several $100,000 of broadcast TV. Crane is not on TV at all. He's running a little bit of cable, but not that much. And I don't think any of his ads actually mention Nez at all. They're all just positive on Crane. So it's kind of an interesting test case of, left to its own devices, how does a district behave when they're not being influenced by $10 million in super PAC money from the outside? What happens here? And I don't know. I mean, I think we have it appropriately rated at likely Republican, but the congressional race is still clearly unsettled, and if you drill into the undecided voters here, what you'll find is that they're a bit of an esoteric bunch. They really don't like Eli Crane. The undecided voters, well, they don't really know him, but the ones who do know him don't like him at all. They hate Carrie Lake, who is unpopular in this district, which I thought was pretty interesting. Carrie Lake's overall image in this seat is 43 favorable, 54% unfavorable. So everybody knows who she is, and she is not popular. Among undecided voters in the congressional race, her unfave is 24% favorable, 71% unfavorable. Now, caveat with all this, I am cross-tab diving here, so put me in the stocks outside of election Twitter village. But I think what we're finding consistently is that the undecided voters are just not easily put in a box in this district. I think they're not all Trump voters. They break out about half for Trump and a third for Harris, and about a quarter undecided. So, it's an interesting district, and I'm glad we polled it because nobody else is. And
we'll see if this inspires other people, which would give us more data points to see really where things stand. But yet another piece of context for this is that Eli Crane was part of the, I guess, movement that ousted Kevin McCarthy and has kind of been a thorn in the side of the Republican establishment. And so I don't know that the Republican establishment is anxious to just jump off the sidelines and flood the district with money, in order to save him. They want to win. They want to keep the majority, but keeping Eli Crane is not a priority for them. So we'll see how this, election's coming up quick, but we'll see how this plays out.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if we didn't mention, as a loyal Shark Tank devotee, I believe Eli Crane is the only member of Congress to successfully pitch the Shark Tank. You don't remember that he's the guy behind the bottle breach. He would take the shell casings and turn them into bottle openers.
That's right. I had forgotten. I admit. Yeah. I apologize to the congressman. I had forgotten about that appearance. But yes, go ahead.
He's an interesting guy. Former Navy SEAL, like you said, a core member of that group of 9 or so who successfully ousted Kevin McCarthy just a year ago. Isn't that crazy? Just a year ago that all that went down. So yeah, we'll see if this gets more attention on this race. But for now, it is still my pick for sleeper race of the cycle.
And maybe it doesn't qualify anymore because we're talking about it and we pulled it, but we're going to still call it a sleeper. And it looks like we're going to have one more. We got to decide one more House race to pull this cycle. We're grateful to Noble Predictive and their partnership. And we got to decide. So I don't know, drop it in the chat, drop it in comments where we think we should pull, because we've got one more left.
Yeah.
I'd like to welcome our friend Erin Covey of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter. She's coming back to the podcast. Erin, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
For those of you who are newer to the podcast, Erin is an Inside Elections alum. We're not going to ask you about what congressional district you grew up in, because people can go back and listen to episodes 1 through 10 and learn all sorts of things about you. So maybe we'll just hop right in. You are in a unique position right now because you have been on the Inside Elections team and now with Team Cook. When it comes to ratings and analyzing House races, how are things the same or different as you compare and contrast the two teams?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think largely we all see these races in the battlefield the same way. There aren't really any major outliers that I can think of. And it's a lot of, it's most of the process is the same as well. We're talking to campaigns, we're talking to the party committees, to the super PACs, we're looking at their internal polling, we're looking at historic election results, and we're making our judgments using basically the same tools that y'all use. So there aren't really a ton of differences. The main one is that we don't have a tilt column, probably. And so that, maybe a pro and a con, depending on how you look at it. There have been multiple times where Dave Wasserman and I will like talk about a race and we'll be like, yeah, this feels like a tilt race. Unfortunately, we don't have that. But then sometimes, like I was talking to one source that I'll leave unnamed, and she was like, well, the nice thing about not having a tilt is we're not pushing you to move all these tilt races into toss-up right now. And I was like, that is true. So I think there's some differences, also like different personality differences. I think we don't have maybe as strict of a publishing schedule as y'all, and so the ratings changes are more erratic. But aside from that, it's all largely the same. I'm curious what y'all think the differences are, though, from the outside.
I don't know, Jacob. What do you think?
I think that the tilt category is a big one, and it's a big one not just because it's its own, right? It's a clear difference, but it also just means that you guys carry a lot more toss-up races than we do at any given kind of moment on the calendar. I think right now you guys have 26 and we have 13, so almost a doubling there. Whereas the tilt category gives us a little flexibility. But I took the liberty of looking at all of our ratings in comparison to each other. And ultimately what I found was that pretty much in 434 of 435 races, we are never more than one category apart. There's a lot of agreement, especially, of course, on those solid seats. But there's one race that we are not the same on by 2 categories. And so I thought it might be kind of fun to talk about it on the show. Nathan doesn't know what this race is because I didn't bring this up
learning
to him.
I'm learning about this live right now.
I know. I'm trying to figure it out right now.
It is Oregon's 6th congressional district. Democrat Andrea Salinas, who's a freshman member of Congress. She's in a rematch against Mike Erickson, the Republican. We just moved that race to solid Democratic, and you guys still have it at lean Democratic. And that is the only race on the chart where we are more than one category apart. So I thought it might be kind of interesting to talk a little bit about that race. And perhaps why, if we can extrapolate a lot of differences from one Oregon congressional contest, what we might learn from that.
Well, if I mess up this district, then it's going to be bad news, since that's the district I grew up in.
I was going to say
where my parents still live. I think when we recently moved it from likely, which would have been only one category, likely, to solid, in part because Republicans aren't spending any money. And I'm not talking about just the outside groups. I'm talking about the candidate. And I just have a hard time understanding how a Republican, in this case Mike Erickson, is going to win a Democratic leaning district just by the numbers, a Democratic leaning district, when, at least last time I checked the ad impact totals, he had literally spent $1,000 on TV. Like, not just $1,000. So that is, I'm having a mental block there. But Erin, you guys have it rated slightly different, so I'm not sure what you might be seeing.
I mean, I think this is a race that has we've had conversations about moving it over the past couple of months. And I feel like it's maybe less that we see the race dramatically different and more that it's gotten lost in the amount of other races that we have been focused on. And maybe there's been less recent data here from what I have seen, at least. So I think that might be part of it. It's interesting because I feel like in conversations with Democrats, they will still frame this as a competitive race. And, obviously she only won by a couple of points. Salinas only won by a couple of points in 22. So I think starting her in a competitive category makes sense. But I do agree that I think the big open question was if Erickson the Republican was going to put any of his own money in, since he's personally wealthy, and he has not done that so far. So I do think this is a race that probably should move on our end. No promises.
Yeah, well, and it may end up being closer than what, it may end up still being a close race just because it's not a solidly blue district. I mean, and we should
Right.
have said, this is a district that stretches from kind of the southern Portland suburbs down to Salem and down into the Mid Willamette Valley and a little bit out toward the coast. But yeah, it'll probably end up being close almost in spite of the Republicans rather than because of what Republicans are doing.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
And this is a good example. Some people might see our ratings, our two ratings, as very, very similar, Jacob, as you pointed out, but we don't collaborate on the ratings. I know that we're paying attention to what you all are doing, and I think you're paying attention to what we're doing, but we don't get together behind the scenes and agree on a single rating. But we are probably looking to and from similar sources and doing our best analysis. So it's not some backroom deals between Cook and Inside Elections.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And I think I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure the crystal ball ratings are also quite similar to ours as well. Occasionally I see a race that maybe they have in a different category, but I don't think there are any that are more than one or maybe even two categories off. So, largely it's all the battlefield, I feel like, is pretty straightforward this cycle. I don't think there are a ton of races where the parties see them in completely different ways, which is more helpful because sometimes there are races, I think, that fall into that category. And there's definitely some, I feel like California's 41st district, Ken Calvert's seat, that's a seat that Trump won by a point. We've actually had it in toss-up for a while, just because we think Calvert is kind of uniquely weak and his Democratic challenger is uniquely strong. So even though it is maybe less Democratic leaning than some of the other toss-up seats that we have, we still thought that it was going to be a close race. But for a while, Republicans were kind of dismissing it because of the historic election results there previously.
Yeah. And I would throw in Virginia, too, as kind of a similar race where there is that kind of disparity in where the parties see the contest. Democrats clearly think that race between Jen Kiggins, the Republican incumbent, and Missy Cotter Smazel is highly competitive and winnable for them. I think Republicans are just much more skeptical of Kiggins' vulnerability. And but I agree. I think that's kind of the rare instance where there is disagreement about whether a contest is actually highly competitive, top tier, or not as much. So
yeah.
It was a discrepancy between the two parties, not discrepancy between our outlets. I think another race that falls into that category is Pennsylvania's 10th district, right? So this is Harrisburg area district with Republican Scott Perry and Democrat former news anchor Janelle Stelson, where Democrats are very bullish on this race, and Republicans have been sort of, well, Perry's going to be fine. Yeah, it's a Trump district. He's not any different than Trump in his views, so why would he be vulnerable? And we've kind of operated on the two parties having differing views, but yet now Republicans are starting to spend more money into the race, which feels like an acknowledgement that maybe the race is closer to the big D Democratic view of the race rather than what Republicans, the confidence they had been putting out there before.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think we've seen there's enough evidence now that Stelson is probably going to overperform Harris in this district. The Democrat, I should clarify, the Democratic congressional candidate there, Janelle Stelson. I think from the polls I have seen from both parties and public data, it does seem like she's going to overperform Harris. And so I think this is definitely a competitive race at this point, and Republicans can't dismiss it. I also think, Harrisburg is one of those places where Harris might make gains relative to where Biden was in 2020, and that could offset the losses she might have in places like Northeast PA, because Harrisburg is just a growing area and there's been a lot of expansion there. And as the suburbs have moved towards Democrats, that's a place where you would expect her to be potentially doing better.
Yeah. And that district is, Erin, like you said, going to see some spending. Congressional Leadership Fund is finally getting involved there on Perry's behalf. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, was in the district a couple days ago. Nathan, you, I'm sure, saw what Scott Perry said when he was asked about a poll that showed him losing. A poll that, in fairness to the congressman, was way too bullish on Democrats in that district, but showed him losing by a considerable amount. And he said, the only poll we're focused on is the one on election day, which dedicated viewers of the podcast, readers of Inside Elections, know is one of the many things that losing candidates like to say about their race. But clearly cavalry beginning to come in for Perry. I think this is also a good example of a race where candidate quality clearly matters.
Mm-hmm.
We are in an era in which ticket splitting is on a real decline, and by and large, how a district votes for the presidential election is going to determine how it votes in the House. But it still does matter who the individual candidates are, and Stelson has proved very adept at positioning herself as this moderate, bipartisan. She's a former Republican, trusted news anchor who's also trying to coast on some energy from the post-Dobbs reset on abortion politics. And Perry, meanwhile, former head of the House Freedom Caucus, not a lot of friends high up in the Republican Party. That's part of why we haven't seen big money come in for him as of yet. Or until now, and not a guy who went to DC to make friends.
And, as he said in his latest campaign ad.
Exactly.
He's leading into that.
And a guy who has really bear hugged former President Trump in a district that Trump won, yes, but only by, I think, 4 points in 2020. So, again, the overall kind of absolute split between the presidential and the House result in this seat might not be massive, right? We're not talking about like a 20-point delta, but even if it's just, 5 points, 6 points, that is kind of in the area where Stelson could pull off an upset.
Yeah. And as Democrats like to point out, Shapiro did carry this district in 22, which, he did so well.
Which district did he not carry in 2022? I mean, I was just going to ask you, what other race do you spend time, I say, thinking about? I know you're thinking about all the races, or at least, but that is confusing, or you wish you had more data, or you're really not sure what's happening and you're trying to figure it out. What's one of those districts?
That's interesting. I mean, some of the tougher races to call are the ones that we don't know whether we should move it into a category that opposes the party that holds the seat. And so right now we have Brandon Williams, a Republican in upstate New York, in the lean Democrat column. We've had that there for a little bit. But then there's a question of some other races in the toss-up category that don't look great for Republicans right now, and Republicans will admit they're not feeling great about them, like Anthony D'Esposito on Long Island, Don Bacon in Omaha, Nebraska. Those are districts where it's like, okay, is it worth making the jump, especially because we don't have a tilt category, from a toss-up into a lean D? And I think when we're moving an incumbent into a category that opposes them, you have to put maybe a little bit more thought into that, because it's not as common, and it makes a lot of news. And then there's, there are some races where I wish there was more data, like, I don't know, New Mexico's 2nd district. It's a race that quite competitive, but I don't see a lot of polling in. Or Ohio's 13th district, actually, I think is a good example of this. Where we have this rated as a toss-up. Republicans have acknowledged that this one might be tougher than some of the others in their toss-up column, but there also hasn't been a lot of polling, and the polling that we have seen still shows the presidential race is still very close here. And Sykes is a freshman. She's been around in the district for a while in local politics, but there's just a question of like how much weight do we give to that?
Yeah, and that's the Akron-based district represented by Congresswoman Amelia Sykes. Jacob, what district do you think we might disagree on, you and I, and we fight about the most behind the scenes? Give people a look.
Oh, That's a good question. We're in absolute agreement on everything, Nathan.
I know that's not true.
We never have disagreements about
Probably not healthy. Probably not healthy.
What seats. That's I'm going to try and figure out how to answer here without getting myself into too much trouble, because I think that I don't know. I think you've listened to me a lot over the last couple weeks. A lot of the
only the last couple of weeks.
Only the last couple of weeks. What districts do we fight over? I mean, I think right now we talk a lot about those two Arizona seats, the 1st and 6th congressional districts. If I had to pick one, I would probably say Arizona 6, which we have rated as tilt Republican. I think I'm probably a little bit more bullish on Democrats' chances there. I think that I've always been bullish on Jared Golden, even as we've kind of moved him into more vulnerable positions, because I think that's the state of the race. But I do ultimately think he looks pretty strong there. I don't know. I ultimately I don't know. I think we agree on most things.
Yeah.
I feel like there's more differences in maybe style. I think Nathan's more cautious generally and slower to move, or slower to want to move races.
Yeah.
Because I feel like sometimes Jacob and I would be like, "Oh, we got to move this," and you were like, "Maybe let's wait a week." Which is good. And then someone needed to. Maybe it's just an age difference.
Which is probably valid. That's good. This is a live therapy, a live intervention, but that's all right. So, question for both of you, Erin. First, what's so far? We're almost done. It's crazy that this cycle is almost over. But what's been a memorable House race moment for you? It could be an ad or a quote or just an event, a news event. What do you think is a big moment this cycle?
Oh, It's hard to parse. I mean, there have been weird scandals that have broke, like the whole thing with Anthony D'Esposito and his alleged lover being put on the payroll. That was a moment. One moment that is less scandalous, but was just more of a kind of a surprise to me was when Nancy Dahlstrom, the lieutenant governor of Alaska, dropped out of the general election after coming in third place, because the Republicans had kind of spent all cycle the Republicans in DC supported her and wanted her to be the one to take on Mary Peltola. But then you had Nick Begich, who had ran last time, had more local support and ended up coming in second place in that primary, since Alaska does all party primaries where everyone's on the same ballot. And the top 4 then advance the general election. And so in order for Republicans to consolidate around one candidate and improve their chances against Peltola, they actually got Dahlstrom dropped out, which she had not agreed to do before. And I had seen no indication that was on the table for her. Whereas Begich had said that if he came in third place, he would drop out. So, I think for Democrats, a lot of their strength in that race initially was the fact that it looked like Republicans were going to be divided again, like they were during the previous general election, the special election, which was a large part of the reason that Peltola was able to win. So that really reset the race for me, and that's a race that I think now Peltola is definitely one of the top 5 most vulnerable Democrats in the country, in part because of that.
Yeah, I mean, obvious answer is I don't know, Biden dropping out, but that's too easy. So I'm not gonna.
We're gonna focus on the House. Yeah.
I'm not gonna pick that one.
That doesn't have an impact.
That had the biggest impact on the House, sure, but
one of the really interesting moments for me and a potential turning point. I guess I've got 2 of them. The first one is the one that I think is more widespread, and that is the New York redraw of their congressional map. The Democrats in that state did not go nearly as aggressive on the redrawn map as they could have. They, for those who aren't following the saga of New York redistricting, this was a really tortured process. there was a harsh Democratic gerrymander that was tossed out by the state courts. There was a special master drawn map that was used in 2022. Of course, Republicans picked up 5 seats in 2022 just in New York. And then Democrats were successfully able to reconfigure the state Supreme Court or the state Court of Appeals and get a more favorable ruling that allowed them to take another crack at drawing the map through the Democratic-controlled state legislature. And instead of trying to reinstitute a more aggressive gerrymander, they essentially went for a minimal change map that did not markedly change the partisanship of any of the targeted districts, with the potential exception of New York's 22nd district in upstate New York. And so whereas prior to that redraw, I think there was some hope that at least one of either New York's first or second congressional districts would get much better. And then the 17th and the 19th districts in the Hudson Valley, represented by Mike Lawler and Mark Molinaro, would get much better for Democrats. Instead, everything is just kind of the same. Yeah. And other than the 22nd, that Syracuse seat, which was already one of the more Democratic leaning ones and already had the weakest Republican incumbent, there are no gimmies for Democrats on this New York map. I mean, they are in tough races in the 4th district and the 17th district and the 19th district. And neither the first nor the second look particularly promising for them. So that to me is a real a turning point or sliding doors moment. If Democrats had gotten more aggressive and put more of those seats in their column right off the bat, like Republicans did in North Carolina, for instance, I think the picture of the House would be very different. And then, the kind of the coda to that is in the 17th district, which should by all rights be one of Democrats' best pickup opportunities on the map. It's a seat that voted for Biden by 11 points. It's in the Hudson Valley. Democrats messed up on the third-party working families line, which typically goes to Democrats in New York, and their votes count. You can vote for the Democrat on the Democratic line or the working families line. Republicans were basically able to get a fake candidate onto the working families party line instead of Mondaire Jones, the Democratic nominee. And now he's not just having to run against Mike Lawler. He also has to make sure that nobody votes for the Working Families Party and siphons away votes from his own campaign. So we have that race rated tilt Republican, which, gosh, if you went back a year and told me that that would be the worst opportunity for Democrats in New York, I'm not sure I would have believed you, but it's kind of where we are now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder, at the end of the day, how much the WFP candidate gets. And, but I'm sure that if it's anything more than the margin of victory, if Lawler wins, then Democrats are going to blame that candidate for ruining their chances there.
Yeah.
Which may be a bit of a cop out, but definitely is not helping.
I think my favorite moment is going to be the Derek Anderson non-family photo.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
And this is happening. So Derek Anderson is a Republican running in Virginia's 7th district, which is an open seat because Abigail Spanberger is starting her gubernatorial run early. And he put out, for those of you who haven't been following, Anderson put out a number of photos and videos of himself that, the super PACs are supposed to grab and make in ads. And one of them is this family photo that is not his family. It is his friend's wife, his friend's kids. And I chuckle about it every day because I've never seen, more than 20 years of doing this, I've never seen a candidate do that before. And I guess he said either in the debate or the interview that, well, I didn't tell everyone that was my family. And I'm like, well, I think you led us down that path with how everyone is
right.
positioned in that picture. So to me, like that's just such a great, such a great moment in an important race.
Yeah. This is a less important race, but it reminds me of the Danny Davis debacle from earlier in the cycle, where I found out that he was basically using AI generated photos of himself on his campaign website, and his campaign manager basically admitted to it a couple of months later, which was wild. And, it's concerning thinking about how as the technology gets better, how that could be used for campaigns.
Yeah,
But
you were on top of that from the beginning. How one of his hands looked like the wooden hand from the guy from Happy Gilmore, the
yeah, it
golfer.
wasn't subtle.
It was not a good situation. And one of the bigger things from this cycle, I think, is going to stand out is the proliferation of hybrid ads.
Mhm.
That both parties of hybrid ads aren't new, but they're really leaning into this. And for those of you who are more normal than all of us, hybrid ads are where a candidate is working with the party, with the party committees, to split the cost of the ad in order to get the candidate rate, which is lower, but they also have to split the content. And so I noticed this first in Ohio's 9th district, which is Derek Marin against Marcy Kaptur. And half of the ad was talking about prices, I think grocery prices. And then halfway in, it mentioned Derek Marin. And it's like, well, why would they, when Marin needs his name ID to be boosted, like he needs help, but they couldn't do that because they have to split the content. And that's just one example of now probably dozens, if not more than 100 hybrid ads that we're seeing in races all over the country. But probably the success of the parties are going to be judged in part, the results are going to be judged in part by the effectiveness of those ads. So to me, that'll
Yeah.
be a standout.
Well, and it's interesting because even as these House races have become so nationalized over the years, it's still important for a candidate to at least have a certain threshold of name ID in these competitive House races. It does matter for them to have an image. And if you only have half your ad dedicated to that person, it's a lot tougher to break through. So I'm curious how much that will get used in the future. But I think it seems to be something that both parties are moving toward.
And especially in Marin's case, given that he's running against a woman who's represented that area for 40 years almost.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, she's the mayor of Toledo. And so everybody knows who she is. And if you can't talk about either her or him until halfway through your ad, that's going to be a challenge. And I think that's why we think Marcy Kaptur is favored. Or do you guys have
We
Marcy
do too.
Kaptur?
We have her in Lean D, which is
Lean.
probably the one that Republicans disagree with the most out of all of our ratings. So
what has surprised you the most as we approach election day? If you could go back to the beginning of the year, even the beginning of the summer, I don't know.
Mhm.
And tell your former self how one House race has developed. What do you think would surprise you the most?
That's a good question. I think New York 17 is definitely a race that fits in that category because it should, by all accounts, be one of the Democrats' best pickup opportunities. And now it's at a point where it looks like Republicans are at least the slight favorite to hold it. So that's one that has surprised me. Arizona's 1st district, we knew that was going to be competitive. David Schweikert, a Republican, represents it. He's represented it for a while, and it's gotten increasingly more purple over the years. But that's a race where the Democratic primary was so crowded and messy. I was wondering, if whoever emerged was going to be able to get things together in time to raise the money to run an aggressive campaign against Schweikert. And the Democratic nominee, Amish Shah, has, it seems like, been able to do that. He was also, interestingly enough, like one of the weakest fundraisers of that primary, but had a lot of local strength, was a state rep, and that ended up carrying him to victory. But he only won the primary, I think, with less than 25, somewhere around 25%. It was quite low, and that's because that primary was so crowded. So the fact that he was able to raise a lot of money right out of the gate goes to show how much the national party is invested in this race and think that Schweikert is gettable. Let's see. I guess another race. I think the Jared Golden race, I would not have expected that he would have been more vulnerable than some of the other Democrats in Trump districts. But it now seems like he and Peltola, I would say, are probably the two most vulnerable. And the other 3 Democrats who represent Trump districts are in better positions. One of them is Marie Gluesenkamp Perez, who is a freshman. And so should be in the weakest position of the bunch, but she also has the weakest opponent of the bunch in Joe Kent, who just has a lot of baggage and it has just been on the fringes of the Republican Party, of the conservative movement for a while. And so there's so much material for Democrats to pick apart there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. What would y'all say?
I mean, I have a couple that come to mind. I think that Pennsylvania 7 is kind of the most evenly divided, one of the most evenly divided districts in the country. I think based on 2020 presidential results, under the new lines, Pennsylvania 7 was the closest district in the country in 2020. And Northeast PA, moving away from Democrats. Susan Wild, certainly in a competitive race. She's certainly a vulnerable incumbent, but she's got something going on there that has just made her a little bit stronger than whatever the Republicans can throw against her. I think that district, we currently have it rated as tilt Democratic. There was a public poll out from Muhlenberg the other day that had her up by 5 points. I think she has established herself in that race in a way that kind of surprised me. Don Davis is another one. I mean, Erin, you and I talked about this probably a year ago, thinking about who the most vulnerable Democrats were on the map. And I thought Don Davis was going to be at the top of that list because his district was just zooming rightward so quickly. They redrew it to be less favorable to him. Things were not looking great for Democrats in North Carolina. And he's another one who has really kind of leaned on his local roots to shore himself up despite, look, there was a poll out today that your colleague Matthew Klein showed on Twitter that had Harris and Trump tied in North Carolina's first district, basically like 48-47, something like that. Davis up 11 points, 50-39. It's a Don Davis poll, so maybe it's a little hot for him, but if he's only up 6 points or 5 points, that's still a very good margin for a candidate that I would have thought would be kind of at the top of the list of endangered incumbents right now. And then, I don't know. I think I'm kind of surprised that the New Jersey 7 race hasn't been as hot for Democrats as it could have been. There's been a little chatter about it this week, but that's still a tougher poll than a lot of these other seats.
It is, and that one strikes me. It's the kind of district, if you just look at the demographics and the trends there at the presidential level, you would think it would be moving more towards Democrats, but a lot of the polling I've seen still has the presidential race tied. That public poll that came out today had Trump up 1. This is a Biden 4 district, so it doesn't necessarily look like there is going to be movement that direction this cycle. It may actually, Harris may do worse than Biden here, and so that I think also is hampering Democrats' prospects there.
Nathan, what surprised you the most?
It's a good question. I don't know. I guess I was surprised that Biden dropped out. And having that reset at the top of the ticket, that did fundamentally change the outlook for the House. Republicans were on pace to expand the majority because Biden was just cratering at the top. That doesn't make sense. At the top of the ballot, he was dramatically underperforming and was going to drag down all sorts of Democratic candidates. But the way that we're talking about all these races just would not have been the case if Biden had remained at the top. So, but we also, as we zoom out, you two see more data than House data than almost anyone else in the country. I'll say more than anyone else in the country. And we should probably address who's going to be in control of the House of Representatives next year.
Wait a minute. It's your name on the masthead. I'm
asking the questions here. No, I'm happy. I'll go, but I don't want to Bigfoot things.
I truly think it's going to be whoever controls the House will only have it by a couple of seats. I don't think either party can gain more than 9-10 seats max on this map. If you do the math on our ratings, and it's tougher because we don't have the tilt category, and so I think there's toss-up races where I could make judgments about which ones are the slight favorites. we still have 202 races favoring Democrats, 207 favoring Republicans. So obviously that's not enough outright to get them to 218, which is what they need for a majority. Typically one party will do better in a larger chunk of the toss-ups. They usually don't split right down the middle. There's a couple more Republicans in the toss-up category than Democrats. That also kind of impacts the math, but also Republicans have a slight majority, obviously. And so I think if you're just like dividing it down the middle, it's like, I think you can probably say that maybe Republicans have the slightest of edges, but it is very, very close.
Do you all, and I'll talk about our range, do you all have an official range?
We don't have a numerical range yet. What I wrote a couple of months ago was single digit gain for either party, which I think is correct at this point. I think if you did the math on allocating the toss-ups, all the toss-ups one way or the other, like if all the toss-ups broke towards Democrats, that would put Democrats at 228 and Republicans at 207. If all the toss-ups broke towards Republicans would have 233 and Democrats would have 202. But I think either party will have a smaller majority than that. I don't think that's kind of a low double digit gain. I think it's going to be more in the single digits.
Yeah. I mean, so Democrats need a net gain of 4. Our range right now is anything from a Democratic gain of 7 to a Republican gain of 6 seats. And so I think that as you kind of walk through the narrative of where you are and where we are numerically, it sounds pretty similar. But Jacob, what do you? And so before Jacob, I'll say district by district, it looks like Republicans have an easier path. They need to win four out of our 13 toss-ups. Democrats have to win 10 out of 13. But I also have a hard time seeing the presidential race in the House going in different directions. It is very possible that happens. It feels like they're going to go with each other. But Jacob, what do you disagree with me, Jacob, if you need to?
Yeah, I mean, look, in 2016, Trump won the presidency. Democrats picked up 6 seats in the House, which would be enough for them this time. So I don't think we should rule it out entirely. I agree that we're looking at one of the closer houses in either direction come next January. I mean, the current situation was one of the closest in history. I mean, Republicans ultimately settling at that 4 vote majority, 221 to 214. I think that I don't know. It's gonna be really close.
And close means we probably won't know for a few days because we're going to have the results in every single district, which means waiting in Pennsylvania, waiting in California, maybe waiting in New York for all the votes to be counted.
Definitely
a few days would be lovely.
Yeah, I feel like it's going to be weeks.
if we have results in a few days, I think, and that's where the ratings are nice to have, right? Because empirically, I don't think we're going to know who actually has 218 seats in the bag.
Yeah.
Anytime close to election night. But if we're on election night and Republicans are winning Virginia 7, if they're winning Pennsylvania 7, if they're winning Pennsylvania 8, then that tells us one thing. If they're winning North Carolina 1, that tells us one thing. If Democrats are winning Virginia 2, if they're winning Pennsylvania 10, Ohio 13 and 1 and 9 all get called easily on election, right? You can kind of glean what the overall picture of the race is based on the results you do have.
Yeah.
Even if the actual path to 218 can only be filled in 3 weeks after Election Day, when California certifies its results and Alaska, counts all the ballots that have been delivered by Bush plane. to Juneau or wherever they, tally everything up.
Nathan, what do you think are the odds? Because I agree with you. I think it would be weird to see the House and the presidency go two different directions, but it seems like it is definitely a real scenario. What are the odds that it goes the other way, where Harris wins the White House and Republicans keep the House?
I would say less likely. I mean, if Harris is winning, she's probably doing well enough in the competitive districts, getting close enough to the Biden 2020 number that will help those down ballot Democrats. I'm thinking of I'm doing the looking at the ratings in my head, even though I should just pull them up. But I think Washington's third with Glusenkamp Perez might be the only toss-up district that we have that Trump carried in, where Trump finished ahead of Biden.
Golden.
And Jared Golden, yeah, that was the one.
Yeah, and the Iowas.
Okay, well, forget all that. No, I'm just
and Alaska.
So if she gets to those, if she's winning, if she wins the race, that means she has gotten at least close to the 2020 performance, and that should.
Yeah.
I guess my one pushback to that is, I mean, she might not in like California and New York, in the Central Valley on Long Island, which could keep Republicans there when they maybe you wouldn't expect. Republicans could still do fine enough to win in those places while still like losing maybe the Iowa seats and Nebraska too. I feel like because of where the demographic trends are going. But yeah, I think that's probably the most likely outcome is that they go the same way ultimately.
Well, we need to move on, Erin, but you have to, for old time's sake, you have to stick around for Look What I Found. If that's all right, you are obligated to stay. So let's move on. And now for our final segment, Look What I Found. This is anything we've stumbled upon recently. Erin, you know the drill. It doesn't have to be political. What did you find?
So I'm reading a lot of books that I haven't finished right now, so I can't give like a full recommendation of this book. But
not a full and complete endorsement?
No, not a full and complete. It's a partial endorsement. It's not an endorsement. So please don't write that on their website. The book is called The Husbands. I can't remember the name of the author, but it's a really interesting concept. It's like this magic realism book about this girl who comes home to find a strange man in her house who actually happens to be her husband in this new reality that she's walked into. But then she realizes after her husband goes up into the attic to get something that a new husband can come down. And so as soon as she can send her husband up to the attic, she gets a new husband, and then she gets like basically a reset life with slightly different things about like her relationships with friends and her job and everything else with her life is slightly different based on which husband she's with. So it's a really interesting concept. We had it for book club, and the people who did finish reading it disagreed very strongly about whether they liked it or not. So it seems like a polarizing book, which I think is a good thing. It's definitely a fast read. It's fast, even though I haven't finished it because I just have been so busy with election stuff. That it moves really quickly. So I think it's probably, I'll give it my cautious endorsement.
Is one of the husbands that comes down, is one of them Derek Anderson of Virginia? Like, is it based off of the woman in the picture?
Yes.
Anyway.
Oh man.
We're really reaching. But Jacob, what did you find?
Well, I am in the fun position of normally I'm the I get to do the highbrow and somebody else does the lowbrow, but Erin took the highbrow route today with some magical realism. So I will go lowbrow. I have been watching with my girlfriend Love is Blind, the DC season, or as I like to call it, Love is Blind Roslyn or Crystal City, because they don't actually spend any time in DC. But it's a lot of fun. Mostly, though, as someone who grew up here, it's fun to see that none of these people are actually, half of them don't even live in DC. One of them lives in Fredericksburg, Virginia, which, get your own season. But it's
that's yeah.
Yeah, it's It's been a lot of fun. I've been trying very hard to avoid spoilers online. Fortunately, I don't think the algorithm knows that I like this show. We'll see how closely they're listening to all our data if I start getting more Love is Blind content on my Twitter feed. But that is what I've found over the last couple weeks.
I have the reverse issue where the algorithm thinks I watch more reality TV than I do. It's against my will.
I am trapped in other algorithms. Thankfully, that is not one of them because I know about the show, but I have no desire whatsoever or time to watch it. But apparently, I watch things that are very old because what I found was that Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure still holds up. I forced my 13-year-old and 11-year-old sons to watch it. They were reluctant, but it holds up pretty well. I think they like some of the slapstick Genghis Khan in the sporting goods store type comedy, and I think they described some of the graphics with the telephone booth as cringy, which is what the kids use. But I think they enjoyed it. They won't completely disown me for making them watch Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
I still haven't seen it, so you can disown me, I guess.
Oh my goodness. It's good. You know, I wouldn't recommend the sequels, but if you're watching any reality TV, Bill and Ted is going to be better than that. I will guarantee you. I'll guarantee that. So. Anyway, Erin, thank you for joining us once again. Always a pleasure to see you.
Thanks for having me on.
And that's all the time we have. We walk through our latest Senate ratings changes. We release the results of the latest Inside Elections House Battleground polling, and we welcomed Erin Covey back to talk about all things House related. Thank you for listening. At Inside Elections, we provide nonpartisan analysis of congressional, presidential, and gubernatorial races. With a combination of reporting and data, we break down the key races and bring valuable context to complex elections. Please go to InsideElections.com to subscribe to the bi-weekly newsletter. We've got individual subscriptions and group packages that are tailored for association and corporate PACs. If you like this episode, please subscribe to the podcast. Give us a rating if you're watching on YouTube. Click the thumbs up button and subscribe as well. If you didn't like today's episode, please email Alex Winter. We also want to thank our producers, Alan Tazinski and Melissa Lenner of Pretty Easy Podcasts, and our associate producer, Conrad Tolosa. Please come back and join us again next time.